Hello everyone, welcome to Mrs. Cooke's story time, and we're now on part 6 of the Graveyard book by Neil Gaiman. Now I had to stop quite abruptly last time because somebody knocked on my door, so I didn't quite stop exactly where I wanted to. So let's carry on. We're in the middle of the action and it looks like Bod is about to be eaten by a huge grey hairy wolf. The dog spoke in Miss Lepescu's voice. It said, "This is the third time the night gaunts have saved your life, Bod. The first was when you called for help, and they heard. They got the message to me, telling me where you were. The second was around the fire last night, when you were asleep. They were circling in the darkness, and I heard a couple of the ghouls saying that you were ill luck for them, and that they should beat your brains in with a rock, and put you somewhere they could find you again, when you were properly rotted down, and then they would eat you. The night gaunts dealt with the matter silently. And now this." "Miss Lepescu?" The great dog-like head lowered towards him, and for one mad, fear-filled moment he thought she was going to take a bite out of him. But her tongue licked the side of his face affectionately. "You hurt your ankle?" "Yes, I can't stand on it." "Let's get you onto my back," said the huge grey beast that was Miss Lepescu. She said something in the night gaunt's screeching tongue, and it came over, held Bod up while he put his arms around Miss Lepescu's neck. "Hold my fur," she said. "Hold tight. Now, before we go, say," and she made a high, screeching noise. "What does it mean?" "Thank you," or "goodbye." Both. Bod screeched as best he could, and the night gaunt made an amused chuckle. Then it made a similar noise, and it spread its great leathery wings, and it ran into the desert wind, flapping hard. And the wind caught it and carried it aloft like a kite that had begun to fly. "Now," said the beast that was Miss Lepescu, "hold on tightly," and she began to run. "Are we going to the wall of graves?" "To the ghoul gates? No, those are for ghouls. I am a hound of dog, or hound of God. I travel my own road, into hell and out of it." And it seemed to Bod as if she ran even faster then. The huge moon rose, and the smaller mould-coloured moon, and they were joined by a ruby-red moon, and the grey wolf ran at a steady lope beneath them across the desert of bones. She stopped by a broken clay building like an enormous beehive, built beside a small rill of water that came bubbling out of the desert rock, splashed down into a tiny pool and was gone again. The grey wolf put her head down and drank, and Bod scooped water up in his hands, drinking the water in a dozen tiny gulps. "This is the boundary," said the grey wolf that was Miss Lepescu, and Bod looked up. The 3 moons had gone. Now he could see the Milky Way, see it as he had never seen it before, a glimmering shroud across the arch of the sky. The sky was filled with stars. "They're beautiful," said Bod. "When we get you home," said Miss Lepescu, "I teach you the names of the stars and their constellations." "I'd like that," admitted Bod. Bod clambered onto her huge grey back once more, and he buried his face in her fur and held on tightly. And it seemed only moments later that he was being carried, awkwardly, as a grown woman carries a 6-year-old boy, across the graveyard to the Owens' tomb. "He's hurt his ankle," Miss Lepescu was saying. Poor little soul, said Mistress Owens, taking the boy from her and cradling him in her capable, if insubstantial, arms. I can't say I didn't worry, for I did, but he's back now, and that's all that matters. And then he was perfectly comfortable beneath the earth in a good place, with his head on his pillow, and a gentle, exhausted darkness took him. Bod's left ankle was swollen and purple. Dr. Trefusis, 1870 to 1936, may he wake to glory, inspected it and pronounced it merely sprained. Miss Lepescu returned from a journey to the chemist's with a tight ankle bandage, and Josiah Worthington, Bart, who had been buried with his ebony walking cane, insisted on lending it to Bod, who had too much fun leaning on the stick and pretended to be 100 years old. Bod limped up the hill and retrieved a folded piece of paper from beneath a stone. The Hounds of God. It was printed in a purple ink, and it was the first item on a list. Those that men call werewolves or lycanthropes call themselves the Hounds of God, as they claim their transformation is a gift from their Creator, and they repay the gift with their tenacity, for they will pursue an evildoer to the very gates of hell. Bod nodded. Not just evildoers, he thought. He read the rest of the list, committing it to memory as best he could, then went down to the chapel, where Miss Lepescu was waiting for him with a small meat pie and a huge bag of chips she had bought from the fish and chip shop at the bottom of the hill, and another pile of purple inked duplicated lists. The two of them shared the chips, and once or twice Miss Lepescu even smiled. Silas came back at the end of the month. He carried his black bag in his left hand, and he held his right arm stiffly. But he was Silas, and Bod was happy to see him, and even happier when Silas gave him a present, a little model of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. It was almost midnight, and it was still not fully dark. The three of them sat at the top of the hill, with the lights of the city glimmering beneath them. I trust that all went well in my absence, said Silas. I learned a lot, said Bod, still holding his bridge. He pointed up into the night sky. That's the big bear, and her son, the little bear. That's Draco the dragon, snaking between them. Very good, said Silas. And you? asked Bod. Did you learn anything while you were away? Oh, yes, said Silas, but he declined to elaborate. I also, said Miss Lepescu primly, I also learned things. Good, said Silas. An owl hooted in the branches of an oak tree. You know, I heard rumours while I was away, said Silas, that some weeks ago you both went somewhat further afield than I would have been able to follow. Normally I would advise caution, but unlike some, the ghoul folk have short memories. Bod said, It's okay, Miss Lepescu looked after me. I was never in any danger. Miss Lepescu looked at Bod, and her eyes shone. Then she looked at Silas. There are so many things to know, she said. Perhaps I come back next year, in high summer also, to teach the boy again. Silas looked at Miss Lepescu, and he raised an eyebrow a fraction. Then he looked at Bod. I'd like that, said Bod. Now we're on to chapter 4, The Witch's Headstone. And the sketch is one that says, They say a witch is buried here. The Witch's Headstone. There was a witch buried at the edge of the graveyard. It was common knowledge. Bod had been told to keep away from that corner of the world by Mrs. Owens as far back as he could remember. Why? He asked. Tain't healthy for a living body, said Mrs. Owens. "There's damp down that end of things. It's practically a marsh. You'll catch your death." Mr. Owens himself was more evasive and less imaginative. "It's not a good place," was all he said. The graveyard proper ended at the bottom of the west side of the hill, beneath the old apple tree, with a fence of rust-brown iron railings, each topped with a small rusting spearhead. But there was a wasteland beyond that, a mass of nettles and weeds, of brambles and autumnal rubbish, and Bod, who was on the whole obedient, did not push between the railings, but he went down there and looked through. He knew he wasn't being told the whole story, and it irritated him. Bod went back up the hill to the little chapel near the entrance to the graveyard, and he waited until it got dark. As twilight edged from grey to purple, there was a noise in the spire like a fluttering of heavy velvet, and Silas left his resting place in the belfry and clambered head first down the spire. "What's in the far corner of the graveyard?" asked Bod. "Past Harrison Westwood, baker of this parish, and his wives, Marion and Joan." "Why do you ask?" said his guardian, brushing the dust from his black suit with ivory fingers. Bod shrugged. "Just wondered." "It's unconsecrated ground," said Silas. "Do you know what that means?" "Not really," said Bod. Silas walked across the path without disturbing a fallen leaf and sat down on the bench beside Bod. "There are those," he said in his silken voice, "who believe that all land is sacred, that it is sacred before we come to it, and sacred after. But here, in your land, they bless the churches and the ground they set aside to bury people in, to make it holy. But they left land unconsecrated beside the sacred ground, potters' fields to bury the criminals and the suicides, or those who were not of the faith." "So the people buried in the ground on the other side of the fence are bad people?" Silas raised one perfect eyebrow. "Oh, not at all. Let's see. It's been a while since I've been down that way, but I don't remember anyone particularly evil. Remember, in days gone by, you could be hanged for stealing a shilling, and there are always people who find their lives have become so unsupportable they believe the best thing they could do would be to hasten their transition to another plane of existence." "They kill themselves, you mean?" said Bod. He was about 8 years old, wide-eyed and inquisitive, and he was not stupid. "Indeed." "Does it work? Are they happier dead?" "Sometimes. Mostly, no. It's like the people who believe they'll be happy if they go and live somewhere else, but who learn it doesn't work that way. Wherever you go, you take yourself with you, if you see what I mean." "Sort of," said Bod. Silas reached down and ruffled the boy's hair. Bod said, "What about the witch?" "Yes, exactly," said Silas. "Suicides, criminals and witches. Those who died unshriven." He stood up, a midnight shadow in the twilight. "All this talking," he said, "and I've not even had my breakfast. While you will be late for lessons." In the twilight of the graveyard there was a silent implosion, a flutter of velvet darkness, and Silas was gone. The moon had begun to rise by the time Bod reached Mr. Pennyworth's mausoleum, and Thomas Pennyworth, here he lies in the certainty of the most glorious resurrection, was already waiting, and he was not in the best of moods. "You are late," he said. "Sorry, Mr. Pennyworth." Mr. Pennyworth tuttered. The previous week, Mr. Pennyworth had been teaching Bod about elements and humours, and Bod had kept forgetting which was which. He was expecting a test, but instead Mr. Pennyworth said, "I think it's time to spend a few days on practical matters. Time is passing, after all." Is it? asked Bod. I'm afraid so, young Master Owens. Now, how is your fading? Bod had hoped he would not be asked that question. It's all right, he said. I mean, you know. No, Master Owens, I do not know. Why do you not demonstrate for me? Bod's heart sank. He took a deep breath and did his best, squinching up his eyes and trying to fade away. Mr. Pennyworth was not impressed. Pah! That's the kind of thing. Not the kind of thing at all. Slipping and fading, boy, the way of the dead. Slip through shadows, fade from awareness. Try again. Bod tried harder. You're as plain as the nose on your face, said Mr. Pennyworth, and your nose is remarkably obvious, as is the rest of your face, young man. As are you. For the sake of all that is holy, empty your mind. Now, you are an empty alleyway. You are a vacant doorway. You are nothing. Eyes will not see you. Minds will not hold you. Where you are is nothing and nobody. Bod tried again. He closed his eyes and imagined himself fading into the stained stonework of the mausoleum wall, becoming a shadow of the night and nothing more. He sneezed. Achoo! Dreadful, said Mr. Pennyworth with a sigh. Quite dreadful. I believe I shall have a word with your guardian about this. He shook his head. So, the humours, list them. Sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, and the other one, melancholic, I think. And so it went, until it was time for grammar and composition with Miss Letitia Borrows, spinster of this parish, who did no harm to no man all the days of her life. Reader, can you say likewise? Bod liked Miss Borrows and the cosiness of her little crypt, and that she could all too easily be led off the subject. They say there's a witch with unconsecrated ground, he said. Yes, dear, but you don't want to go over there. Why not? Miss Borrows smiled the guileless smile of the dead. They aren't our sort of people, she said. But it is the graveyard, isn't it? I mean, I'm allowed to go there if I want to. That, said Miss Borrows, would not be advisable. Bod was obedient but curious, and so, when lessons were done for the night, he walked past Harrison Westwood Baker and Family's Memorial, a broken-armed angel, but did not climb down the hill to the potter's field. Instead, he walked up the side of the hill to where a picnic some 30 years before had left its mark in the shape of a large apple tree. There were some lessons that Bod had mastered. He had eaten a belly full of unripe apples, sour and white-pipped from the tree some years before, and had regretted it for days, his guts cramping and painful, while Mrs. Owens lectured him on what not to eat. Now he always waited until the apples were ripe before eating them, and never ate more than 2 or 3 a night. He had finished the last of the apples the week before, but he liked the apple tree as a place to think. He edged up to the trunk, to his favourite place in the crook of 2 branches, and looked down at the potter's field below him, a brambly patch of weeds and unmown grass in the moonlight. He wondered whether the witch would be old and iron-toothed and travel in a house on chicken legs, or whether she would be thin and sharp-nosed and carry a broomstick. Bod's stomach growled, and he realised he was getting hungry. He wished he had not devoured all the apples on the tree, that he'd left just one. He glanced up and thought he saw something. He looked once, looked twice, to be certain. An apple, red and ripe. Bod prided himself on his tree-climbing skills. He swung himself up, branch by branch, and imagined he was Silas, swarming smoothly up a sheer brick wall. The apple, the red of it almost black in the moonlight, hung just out of reach. Bod moved slowly forward along the branch until he was just below the apple. Then he stretched up and the tips of his fingers touched the perfect apple. He was never to taste it. A snap, loud as a hunter's gun, as the branch gave way beneath him. Oh no! And that's it for today. So, tune in tomorrow, folks, to listen to part 7 of The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. And have a good night tonight. Bye.